Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, my name is Kate Stricklan. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Application Review at the University of Colorado Boulder. I live in Boulder with my family, which includes a fifth grader and a freshman in high school.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagner Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good morning, friends. If you're new to Your College Bound Kid, we deliver commercial-free deep dives every Monday and every Thursday on college life and college admissions. And our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We think of ourselves as a listening family, and we try to support each other. So today, as always, I'm always excited to come meet with you guys, and no different today. I got a bunch of announcements, and then we'll get into our outline. So by the time you hear this, we will have had a Counselor Connect meeting. That's right. We have a special speaker who's an expert in AI and admissions speaking to a group of college counselors in about 6 hours. And I'm mentioning it because we really could use some more college counselors, particularly community-based organization college counselors, public school college counselors, and independent or private school college counselors. So if you fit in that group, or if you know others, please recommend they just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com. You'll see under the resources tab, you'll see how you can apply to be in our group. We meet monthly. We either have special speakers or we break out into small groups and support each other. Friends, episode 600 is close. And if you've been around a while, you know in episode 500, we did something creative and it was so well received. I said, we just have a new tradition. The whole episode is going to be us hearing from you. So what you do is just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK and share any tip that's helped you or your family in college admissions. We're going to crowdsource our knowledge, and we're doing it again for episode 600, and that's only 9 Mondays away. So it's actually not too soon for you to go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, and I just renewed and paid next year's membership up front, so we're good for a year. And leave your tip. Because sometimes, you know, when the lightning bolt of inspiration hits you, it hits you. And you might be trying to rack your brain around episode 600 week, and it might come up empty. But you might have a thought now, an inspirational thought you want to share with the rest of us. Go there. We won't play it yet. We'll play them on episode 600. That was a very special episode for me personally, and for a lot of us, 500. So we're going to do it again every 100 episodes. Survey update. Almost 500 of you completed our Your College Bound Kids survey. And you should know everything's being tabulated and reports are being put together right now as we speak. We're going to have a great one-page overview for you to see, learn kind of, you know, what you guys are looking for, what you like, what you think's working, what needs to improve. We're about 2 weeks away from having that completely ready for you. I just didn't want you to think we'd forgot about you. And friends, just so you know, I'm already starting to implement some of the things I saw in that survey. For example, there were some requests that we don't do as many of sort of those, 5, 6, 7 parters that we sometimes do. And that's what led me to do a whole 1 hour and 15-minute segment with Hillary last week, because otherwise I was going to stretch. I would have normally broken that up into 3 segments, and that would have been part 5, 6, and 7. But I said, okay, let's get this over. Also, Sam and Samantha, that would have been a 3-parter, and I made that a 2-parter. If you heard Thursday's episode, the students really got great feedback on that episode. It makes me think maybe we need to have more student voices. But I want you guys to speak up and let us know what's working and not working. The survey, of course, was one opportunity to do that, but there are other opportunities as well. When I was at KIPP, we called it affirming and adjusting feedback. And that's what I do even now when I give feedback to my students on like essays, for example, especially if it's written feedback. I have a section called affirming feedback, adjusting feedback with bullet points. And you guys can do that as well. So one good way to still do that is just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK. Some of you have been doing that. For example, somebody didn't like the way that I described the student who fabricated her identity and got into Yale and left a message very, you can tell by someone's tone when they're trying to help. And this was clearly kind of coming from a place of love. And so I took that to heart. And so, just little things can make the podcast better. If you have feedback, if you didn't get a chance to express yourself in the survey, or if there's things that you really like that we're doing, or if there's an episode that really lands well, or even specific content that you'd like to see more of. Like, we're trying to be responsive to the needs of our listeners. So we're trying our best to get a gauge on what you're looking for. So yeah, the survey's done, but you still have speakpipe.com/YCBK. Great place to leave a message, adjusting or affirming feedback. So friends, those of you who have been around for a while used to remember I used to have a recommended resource on every episode, every Thursday episode. I sure did. A big number, a recommended resource. Remember that? And an admissions tip. So I kind of got away from that because, like, when you're doing a Monday and a Thursday, 3 days, bang, another episode comes right away, and there's a lot to prepare for one. But you're going to get a bunch of them next Monday. So next Monday, I'm going to kind of unload and give you guys a bunch of recommended resources all in one episode. So if you like the recommended resources, look for them next Monday because I'm going to have a nice chunk of them for you. All right, friends, on today's episode, Kate and Susan continue to talk. I'm in that conversation, the three of us. And what started off as a conversation around feedback from the NACAC conference, it spread out into us just putting the mic down and talking. So we get into a lot of things today. We talk about how some schools, you can't judge a school by its acceptance rate. We talk about that. We also talk a lot about being a hooked applicant and what a hooked applicant is and how a hooked applicant impacts admissions reads. So we talk about that. And then we transition to a brand new interview. And it is with Heath Einstein back on the podcast again. Get used to Heath. He's going to be a regular. He's committed to come on twice a year. And so we're talking about a topic I've wanted to do a really deep dive on for years. And that is what do colleges look for, expect, like, don't like when it comes to teacher recommendations. So you're going to hear that. It went well over an hour. So that will be, you'll hear that over the next 3 weeks. But let's transition. And the next voices you'll hear will be from Kate and Susan.
Colleges evolve over time. And with our, being in the news and being kind of a college of interest, then that just rises our tide. And we ended up making tougher decisions than people expect for us to be doing so. But also, and you've talked about this really nicely, Mark, before, it's just when a student ties quality to acceptance rate, they're kind of lining themselves up for failure and just to feel bad about themselves for no reason. Because
missing amazing schools.
Yeah. Because regardless of
schools, I feel like that's something I'm gonna dye black and blue in the face with Susan, like trying to do that. And a lot of us around here. I mean, Frank Bruni, that was his book hit that. Salingo's new book. Like we're all sort of crying out there. Like there's amazing schools out here if you can get over this obsession with acceptance rate.
Yeah, exactly. And all these schools that, you might be not so sure about from a selectivity standpoint have incredible resources to provide. Like you can, it's the whole package is there if you, as long as you're open to it.
Well, one of the most helpful things that a university can do to help counselors and kids is give us admissions data by division of study or even by major. Illinois Urbana-Champaign is one of the only ones that does that. Mark, you probably know of some others that do, but that's so helpful when we
The
talk to
challenge, though,
families.
Susan, every time I talk to them, it's like, you see this. How many times does a student say to you they want to switch their major to a less competitive major as a way to backdoor their way in? And so I understand why colleges don't want that inauthenticity on their side, because I get that question all the time. Like, what's the least competitive major? Because that's what I want to declare. And so I understand why schools sometimes do it by college, but not by major, and why they want to keep that close to the vest, because I just feel like as many times as I get students that want to try to act like they're interested in something else as a way of getting into the institution and then figure that they'll do an internal transfer, I've been respecting the transparency. I'm seeing more of this from schools that are saying right on the front end, for certain majors, there is no internal transfer. So don't come here,
Yeah,
you know.
like
Don't come
University of
here thinking,
Washington.
yeah, because so, I'm always for transparency, but I am sympathetic to why I feel colleges are not, divulging all of that, because from my end, it would just be inevitable that people would say, oh, I'm going to apply as this major because I want to get into that school. And if that's what I need to be, then that's what I'm going to be.
Well,
What
but
do you
I
think,
think
Kate?
for a university to give advice like, don't put biomedical engineering or aerospace engineering if you don't have the coursework and the experience to back up that choice. Go undecided engineering. Now, as an undecided, you can, and Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can usually, first year engineering students, the purpose of those programs is that kids can then go into the different engineering disciplines once they are better equipped to make that decision.
Yeah, I would say all of our engineering ones are pretty are pretty competitive, but it's true. Like, if you do truly want to explore and maybe take a class that leads you towards aerospace or biomedical, then you might want to go in undecided. The way that we've been talking to counselors and families lately is, we always want our students to pursue their academic passions. But sometimes because we do publish our kind of middle 50th percentile accepted student data per college. And if you feel like you might be on shakier ground in those data points, weighing how important is it to get a degree and to attend a certain institution for 4 years, have that experience, live in that place, versus how important is it for you to come out of whatever college you attend with a business degree, with an engineering degree. And I physically think of it as like a scale. And that's one way. I know that certainly still leaves a lot up to chance and a lot up for the students to think about, but just kind of trying to distill it as how important is going to this college versus how important is ending up with a certain degree. And I know for engineers, it is pretty important to have that engineering bachelor's to build upon. So
This is where I feel sorry for students, because not every school does allow you to do those internal transfers. Right? Like, you can't switch from biomedical to electrical at Texas, UT Austin, like you can't do it. Like, I mean, it's a process you can go through, but it's most of the time you're not going to get it. So now it puts the onus on the student to learn which schools even allow you to do it. And then you have schools that, like, you can do it within the business majors, but you can't within the engineering major. It's like quite complicated. I find it complicated, and this is what I do every day, like learning every school system. So I have a question for you. So, you're talking about how so many applicants are hooked and people don't understand that. Like, this has been this way for a long time. You talked about it at Bates. You and I used to talk about this at Westtown 20 years ago. We would say, if people really saw the people that are getting into the most selective schools, they're almost always hooked. It's pretty rare that they're not. And do you feel it's gotten worse? Or is it still the same, but the population, I don't know what it is, whether there's just more obsession. Maybe the harder these schools are to get in, the more people want them, or I don't know. Because this doesn't feel like a new thing to me.
No, but I think what has evolved is um, the constellation of institutional priorities. That list is bigger. It's more complicated. It reflects a lot more pressure, I think, on the institution that is reflects the changing academic desires of this generation and a couple of generations before. Back when half the kids who applied to any colleges or universities were truly undecided and were going to explore and figure that out by the end of their sophomore year. Colleges had a lot more room to, to move those kids on a chessboard and see them filling potential slots. And now at a lot of schools, they have, professors who have no one to teach. And academics have had to retool, especially in the liberal arts tradition, as things have shifted toward the professions. And, very few kids can afford to just say, well, I'm going, to find myself, like I did. College was a lot less expensive. I remember my parents saying to me, keep it under $5,000. It's like, keep what? That would pay for like, a week. No, but those pressures and the sociological, pressures of diversity and equity and balancing budgets in terms of financial aid and full pay. Colleges are open about certain institutional priorities.
Sure.
And they are completely private about a lot of others. And families can ask questions, about that. Go to Penn State and say, I'm out of state. Is that a disadvantage? And they'll say, not really. Certain programs are more state funded, so we have to be careful. Like Cornell's colleges,
Sure.
Certain programs are state funded, and they have to prefer in-state residents. But you're not going to get a lot of the weeds from the colleges because, first of all, they don't want to scare any good applicants off.
Yeah.
And I think transparency would be helpful if colleges could figure out how to articulate, like the school right now where I read, to be able to, they're very clear, if you don't get into business as a first-year student, you're never getting in. But you can minor in business. So you could major in economics over here in liberal arts and still be a business minor. So what Kate was saying is you have to be okay with that if you're going to go to this university. So kids are kind of like, yeah, fine, sounds fine to me. They don't realize how much they're going to be missing. And that's what the university needs. Well, you can't take every business class.
I feel for colleges. There's under so much pressure. I've had two colleges in the last two conversations in the last 3 months with senior chief enrollment officers who have said, I'm trying to figure out a way to let kids know we're not as selective as we look without turning kids off because now they're not drawn to us because we don't look as selective as they thought.
Right.
So that's like a pressure that they feel, right? You have this low admit rate and that attracts a certain percentage of people, but then you don't want people saying, oh, I'm not even applying to there. People that you would love to have. Because in reality, maybe the bucket that you fall into, you're not nowhere near that selective. So I know it's a lot of pressure. Well, I could talk to you ladies all day about this stuff, but we should probably wrap it up. I love this stuff.
Oh, I know.
Used to talk for our listeners don't know, Susan and I, when we were working at Westtown at boarding school, we'd go to dinner. We'd be talking for hours, or I'd be in her office for hours. And her husband was so patient, Don. He'd finally come and say, Susan, after hours of us talking.
Or he'd just take the kids home.
Yes, he would do that too.
Say, see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well, this was the life of boarding school people, Kate. Yeah. It's just, it's a whole nother lifestyle. And
I know. Well, the 2 times I taught Latin, I was in boarding school.
Oh, so, no kidding.
Where were you?
I was at Emma Willard School. Was my first job out of college in Troy, and then I was at a boarding school in the southwest of England.
Wow.
Good for you.
Wow.
Love to
Yeah.
have diverse perspectives. Teaching Latin, boarding schools is all good. Great.
Friends, I want to share a story straight from the counseling room that literally, you talk about hot off the press. This occurred yesterday. So I'm meeting with a very strong student, and she's applying early decision to one of the hardest colleges in the country to get into. And so she says to me in the conversation, there are 7 kids from my school who are applying early decision to the same school as I am. And she says several of them are recruited athletes. A few of them are double alums from the same school, meaning both parents attended the school. And so she says to me, is this going to hurt me? Well, I told her how oftentimes kids are not actually competing with each other, even if they're in the same school, they're in different buckets. I told her how one year at Westtown, we had 6 kids go to one of the most selective schools in the country. And that was for a class of like 95, 97 students, which was significantly smaller than the class size, of the student. So I said to her, colleges don't necessarily have firm quotas for each school. I recently heard of a school that took 8 applicants in ED0 from Chicago this year. But I did say, now this is going to sound contradictory, even though they don't have firm quotas, because some kids from the same school can be in completely different buckets, they do want to have a diversity of feeders. They're trying to take multiple kids from different schools in your area and then in your state and then around the country, all 50 states and the whole world. So they don't want to cut those pipelines off from other kids. So there is a sense in which some kids can cannibalize each other. It's not contradictory, but in some ways it is, in some ways it's not. And I told her the year before from Stuyvesant, the highly selective public magnet in New York, only 3 kids got in out of 171 at Brown, and that's according to their own published data. And this applicant happened to be a hooked applicant, but then I said to her, I feel sorry for any unhooked applicant from your school applying where you're applying ED. And I definitely feel sorry for anyone applying in regular decision to where you're applying. Because by the time they take all the hooked applicants, there's just not going to be that many spots left. And it's possible they may feel as if we've already taken quite a few kids from this one feeder. Let's spread out and take students from other feeders. And it's a lack of understanding of this process that produces some of the most disillusionment when decisions come out, especially at affluent suburban schools and at independent schools.
Well, thank you very much. And we'll just have to do some of this, some more. I think some of the best feedback we get is when we just kind of hit record and just kind of talk, and don't necessarily follow script. So this was good. Thank you.
Okay, friends, that concludes this segment, but Kate and Susan are going to be back. You're going to hear from them a lot together over the next several weeks as they answered quite a few questions from a listener, but you'll be hearing that over on Thursday's episodes. But now let's transition to my interview with Heath Einstein on teacher recommendations.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, I'm really excited to bring Heath Einstein to you, VP of Enrollment at TCU in Fort Worth. There are certain people, they're such good communicators that in my eyes, they're on the Mount Rushmore of admissions. Chris Gruber-Davidson is one of those. I feel Andy Strickler on our own team is one of those. Christoph Gutentag, who recently left Duke's office after 34 years, was one. Rick Clark, after 18 years, left the Georgia Tech admission office, was one. And Heath Einstein is one. And so very excited that he's agreed to come on our podcast twice a year. And over the next 3 weeks, you're going to hear a lot of wisdom bequeathed to you as we just have a very wide-scaled conversation about teacher recommendations. And if you're a teacher or you're a recommendation writer, there's a lot of really good content in here for you on how you can write the best recommendations. But mostly it's for students to listen to what makes a great recommendation. So parents, this may be one you want to have your student listen to. Without any further ado, let's listen to part 1 of Heath Einstein on Teacher Rex. Friends, in part 1, Heath gives us some updates on TCU, and then he shares what he learned about admissions from being a parent. He got to be a parent. He got to see what it was like to wear a different hat, and he learned some things. He talks about some major changes going on and mean major at TCU. And then we transition to our topic over the next 3 weeks, Teacher Rex, and we talk about how can you know as a listener, as a student, as a parent, how can you know if Teacher Rex are important or if they're not important? And then he talks about why they're important. And then he gives some great advice on when it comes to recommendations. There's plenty of great advice here. And then he gives us actual examples of some do's and don'ts when it comes to Teacher Rex. Listen and enjoy. Heath Einstein, great to see you again.
Good to see you, Mark.
You gave me such a great time a couple of months ago in Fort Worth, and I wear the garb, I wear the purple all the time. I love it.
I'm so glad. Yeah, we had a great time here. Thanks for coming out.
Awesome. Well, great to have you back. And our listeners, Heath has agreed to come on twice a year. And so we're going to take advantage of his wisdom and expertise. And today we're going to talk about Teacher Rex. But before we do, give us an update on what's new at TCU.
There's a lot going on at TCU right now. We are in year 1 of a new strategic plan called Lead On, Values in Action. There are 4 pillars to the strategic plan. They are student-centered growth, research and creative activities, athletics, and community engagement. And I think what's important there is that student-centered growth is first, because that is what I deal with on a daily basis. We're trying to grow our enrollment, but we're doing it in a very student-centered way to keep TCU. That is our special sauce, is we have a premier student experience at the university. And while we are going to continue to grow and build out our research profile, that is not going to come at the expense of outstanding teaching and contact with students at a very individual level. So it's a really exciting time here in Fort Worth.
Well, I've had multiple students I work with tell me that you gave them the best visit experience. So that's pretty good, because, these families these days aren't just looking at 4 or 5 or 6 schools anymore.
No, that is high praise. And I say that as a father who just went through this process with his daughter, who I'm proud to say ended up here at TCU. But that was not a fait accompli when we began the process. I think, in fact, she was looking at some other places. She kind of wanted to get a little bit away, but kept falling back to, but no place quite matches up to here. So I'm very excited about that.
I have to ask you a question. I love talking to admission officers when their parents went through the process. So what's something that you learned from, visits, or just, you had a chance to put on a different hat. You've been twice on the sending side, so you know what it's like to be a school-based counselor. You've done admissions now for quite some time, but the parent hat is a different lens, right? You got all the schools marketing coming at you, and you're visiting with the parent lens. Was there anything that you learned from sitting in that seat?
Well, I learned a few things. First of all, and perhaps most importantly, I learned about what my daughter wanted.
There you go.
And I really had to take my admission hat off and look at this through the lens of a parent, as you were suggesting, and try to, and even through her eyes, and say, okay, it's not really about me. It's about her. It's the same advice we give to parents.
Sure. You're just forced to have to apply it.
Right. Yeah.
Is it harder to apply it when it's you?
Yeah, much more so. The other thing I learned is that there are a lot of great colleges out there. Of course, I knew that on paper, but seeing it, it sort of made me evaluate, okay, well, what is it that we do in our visit experience? What can I draw upon from some of these other places that we went, whether it was how we communicate to students in advance, to signage around campus, to getting the best possible tour guides. I mean, there was a lot that I soaked up along the way. And then I also have to shout out my TCU colleagues here, because once she decided to enroll here at TCU, going through the orientation program as a parent and all these steps that we ask families to take, we do a really, really great job. And so that was neat to see that everything that we say happens actually does unfold in that way.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, we're not going to redo TCU because Heath was on maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago with Julia and I. We interviewed Heath. I'd encourage anybody to go back and listen to that. But I would like you to just share the size of TCU and particularly the undergraduate, percentage of the total student body and how distinctive that is. Because I think that's important just for people to know that. And then we'll get into talking about Teacher Recs.
Yeah, Steck, that's a great point. We are unique in that way in the landscape of higher ed. We have right now about 11,000 undergraduate students and about 1,900 graduate students. So I'll spare you the math. It's about 86% of all of our students are at the undergraduate level. And if you look at the other schools that we tend to compete with for students, they have a much higher percentage of grad students than we have. Now, I just got through saying that we're going to be building up our graduate student population and our undergraduate student population. And what that will eventually yield for us is roughly 15,000 undergrads and 3,000 grad students. So more of both. The percentage won't change too much. It may be more like 83, 17, 82, 18, something like that. We'll still be heavily on the undergraduate side. And so if you're a high school student, or maybe you're a college student thinking about transitioning to a new college, you can think about TCU as a place that provides you the same sorts of opportunities that you'd find at research universities that are much larger than we are, but also opportunities that you see at smaller colleges with that personal close contact with faculty. A lot of the research that we'll be doing will be, of course, for PhD students, but also available to undergraduate students. Our faculty are incredible, and we are going to invest heavily in programs that are very strong here and think critically about what are opportunities for new programs that match up with what it is that students want to eventually do professionally. And we're paying very close attention to what's happening in the labor market here in the North Texas region.
Heath, who has more than 10,000 undergrads and more than 80% undergraduate besides you? Because I'm scratching my head and I'm really not thinking of anybody. Like there may be someone, but they're not coming to mind for me.
I can't think of anyone off the top of my head either. I'd have to look it up. There may be a couple, but not too many if there are.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, we're going back on TCU. There's a lot of good things to say about TCU. So let's transition to our topic of the day, which is teacher recommendation and advice for teacher recommendations. So Heath, is there any way for a student to know if teacher recs are important or how important they are at a specific college on their college list?
Yeah, there is a way. There are a couple of ways. I'm going to give you one that might seem obvious, and I'm going to give you another that I would guess 99.9% of your listening audience is unaware of. So the first one is ask. Ask the colleges. When you go for a visit or an admission counselor comes to your high school to talk through what the application process looks like, ask them, how important is the letter of recommendation in the file review process? Because there is an answer. Now, whether they're willing to give it to you is a different story, but there is an answer. Now, here's the tidbit that I think people will find very interesting, and that is every college is required to complete something called the Common Data Set. It is, as the name would suggest, a document that has commonly asked questions that every college fills out. Section C of the Common Data Set is all about first-year admission. Section C7 in particular asks colleges to rate the relative importance of each element of the application. So you have like rigor of secondary school or interviews or geographic residence. There are all sorts of factors that colleges might consider, and they are asked to rate them. Very important, considered, or not considered. One of the choices there is recommendation letters. So the college will tell you, even if they don't want to tell you, you can go on their website, because colleges very commonly will list this on their Office of Institutional Research website or something akin to that. You can just Google common data set and fill in then the name of the college you're interested in, and it should pull right up. And that's going to be the best place to look for it, as well as anything else in the application portfolio that you're wondering about relative importance.
Thank you for that. I have a follow-up on that, because we do get into the weeds here. We've talked about Section C7 a fair amount, but we have new listeners all the time. So a lot of times when I look at the demonstrated interest one, which can say important, very important, important, considered, not considered. Sometimes I'm working with a school and it feels like there's not always full transparency on that. And you alluded to before, you can ask them, they may or may not tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Does that feel fair for me to say that? We're not mentioning names there. Like, do you feel like sometimes there's even a little bit of holding back in terms of how that gets categorized? I mean, I can think of schools who have said to me, they're very, very important to me. And then I'll go over there and they're important.
Yeah. Well, look, I can't speak for other colleges. I can only speak for TCU. We fill that out honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to the point where, the only things that we consider very important are academic rigor and grades.
Sure.
Those will carry the day, and that is borne out in how we actually will process the application, what it is that our counselors will be looking at, what it is that our senior level admission folks are looking at when we're making those final calls. I can't say what other institutions do. I imagine that there are some who, may tell you something in private that they might not say publicly, or might not put out there publicly via C7.
And it's just minor shades of nuance too. You know what I mean? It's not like, wow, you bold-faced liar.
Well, right.
It's not like that.
Yeah. It's also hard to give an answer that is universal.
I know.
Because what is true for one student may not be true for another student, and that is holistic admission, right?
Sure.
So in our information session, we put up a pie chart that is suggestive of the relative weight of each facet of the application. However, that doesn't mean that for every student, a letter of recommendation is 15% of the ultimate answer, whether they get in or not. For some student, a letter is so powerful, it carries more weight. For another student, their essay is so fabulous that that's going to carry a little more weight than it will for a different student. So that I think is also part of, like what you're saying, the nuanced nature of what we do.
I actually think that point is really, really important. And that's the kind of thing that can be easy for someone to miss, because they kind of feel like, oh, I figured this thing out. Now I've slotted you into a type of thinking, but you don't realize it can really vary from applicant to applicant, what might tip somebody in or tip them out if all the different options within holistic admissions.
That's right. And what we're trying to project when we're speaking to a group is what it looks like in the aggregate.
Yeah. Great point. So for colleges that do value teacher recs, why do you find them to be so helpful?
Well, there are a lot of reasons why I think a teacher recommendation is helpful. Really, the most important thing is that we are trying to get to know students as much as possible in this process. We would like to believe, I think you would agree with me, certainly hope students would agree with me, that they are more than just a set of data points. A student is more than a GPA and a test score. And so to the extent that a student would share themselves with us, that helps us figure out what kind of person is coming into our community. Because at the end of the day, that is what we are doing. We are not just admitting students into a classroom, but people into our community. This is a 24/7 residential experience at TCU and many other colleges. And so it would be fairly simple to say, we're just going to take people with X GPA and higher, or Y SAT or ACT score and higher. But that's not what we're about. We're about creating community. Part of how we create community is in figuring out who students are as individuals, and part of that assessment comes through in letters of recommendation.
Great. So, listeners, I'm going to take it inside baseball here. So I talked to Heath when I was with him in April about doing this on Teacher Rex, and he's like, "Oh, great! I did this great PowerPoint on this," and so I absolutely loved his PowerPoint. So I'm drawing off a lot of the PowerPoint as we transition to the do's and the don'ts here of good rec writing, but I'm attempting to do something I think we can pull off. So some of what we're talking about sounds like it almost is directed toward the rec writers, right? And we do have them in our audience. We have a lot of counselors that listen to this podcast, but we have more parents and more students. But I think that by hearing what matters to a teacher can also inform sometimes a student or a parent as to, one, actions they might want to have, who they might want to ask, how they might want to carry and comport themselves. And so I'm hoping that as we talk sometimes about what makes a good rec writer rec, the parent or teacher will be able to extrapolate to that myself and think, oh, maybe I better ask this teacher, not that teacher, because I think I've demonstrated these things more. And so in some cases that makes sense, in some cases it doesn't. But let's dive in. If not, we just have a curious bunch who likes to learn this stuff anyway.
Yeah.
We really do.
I'm kind of an admission nerd too, so I relate to that.
You and me both. So we're going to start with the do's. And one of the things you say in the do's is explain the relationship. And I'm curious what you mean by this. I'm particularly interested in this because, especially when I was on the CBO side at KIP, I'd get invited to all of the rec writer training sessions all the time, which I loved. And one of the don'ts that sometimes people would say is, don't talk too much about yourself.
Right.
But that's different from what you're saying here. So talk about what you mean when you say explain the relationship.
Well, I don't disagree with that advice about not talking about yourself. But of course, relationship suggests that it's a two-way street.
Absolutely.
And so that's what I mean when I say explain the relationship. It's how have the two of you, the writer and the subject, i.e. the student, how have you connected to one another over the course of the student's high school journey? A teacher can wear many hats. A teacher can be just that, a teacher. They could be an advisor. They could be a coach. I want to know the context in which the student and the teacher got to know one another, particularly if the relationship has existed over a fairly long stretch of time. Sometimes students will get a teacher who only taught them in 11th or 12th grade, which is fine. But sometimes a student has asked a teacher whom they've had a couple of times. Maybe they had the student in geometry in 9th grade and then again in pre-calculus in 11th grade. And that relationship has probably changed over the course of those 2 or 3 years. And that is important for us to know because it will help give insight into how the student has matured during their high school years. So that's what I mean when I say explain the relationship.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And your next one is one I'm always talking about, but you have examples. I'd love for you to share an example, and that's share examples. I'm always saying anecdotes over adjectives. or as one, I did a rec writer training session a couple of months ago, and the person kept saying over and over, give me evidence.
Yes. Got to give evidence. The same holds true in letters of recommendation. We're going to talk about this, I'm guessing, in a few minutes, about the sometimes what we receive, which are just essentially form letters, which do no good for students. But the way to avoid that is by using specific examples. So that does two things. One is it keeps us from getting bored by reading the same words over and over again. But it also helps us to know what kind of student we'll be seeing in the classroom. It's one thing to say, this student asks really good questions. That's good. We want students who ask good questions. It's another thing to say, when we were studying World War II, the student really asked excellent questions about the nature of the relationship between the Allies and what was known or unknown as the United States approached the beaches of Normandy. Right? I mean, and the reason why that's important is because it helps us to know how a student thinks on a deeper level than just they ask questions. And it also helps us to see what they're going to look like in the classroom, right? I mean, it really brings the student to life. And that, more than anything else, I think can help a student in the admission process, because we're trying to humanize them. And so how best to humanize somebody is to see what they would look like in a particular classroom setting. So I like that. I think those are really important. It's really important for teachers to be able to do that, to draw upon specific experiences. It also becomes easier to write, frankly, for a student, for a teacher. It's hard to just write. I mean, assuming you're not having AI write your letters of recommendation, and I assume, and we could just go, we probably have a whole conversation about that.
Sure.
But assuming that they're doing the writing themselves, if teachers look back on the notes that they've taken about their students over the time in class, there is a treasure trove of information that they can use, and it will be easier for them to write on something specific than just sort of generic fluff.
Yeah, and friends, if you missed what Heath said there, go back 3 minutes, because that's really powerful and really important. And I want to pick up that back up a little later as we get a little further into our conversation. So another thing you mentioned, Heath, that I loved is, this is in the do's, things to do: overcoming obstacles and going beyond expectations. Can you do what you did a second ago and give an example of what that looks like, a teacher?
Yeah, happy to. I want to start by saying that not every student has had crazy obstacles in life. And I think one of the challenges that we face in the year 2025 in college admission is that we on the college side have done a very poor job of helping students understand that it's okay to just be a typical teenager. That because there have been tombs written about the great college essay, and typically it involves, or at least often involves, overcoming some massive odds to achieve something. The lesson that the student takes from this, and I completely understand why, is that trauma needs to be your currency in the admission process. And that is not healthy. And it's not true either. So I want to talk carefully about this, because not every student has experienced a massive obstacle that a teacher is necessarily going to write about. But having said that, we all experience something, right? We've all had that moment in high school when we just lose it because a confluence of events have led to us not being able to turn something in on time, or we just can't take the stress of these external expectations that society has put on us, or that our parents have put on us, or what have you. And so if a teacher has observed the ways in which a student has overcome some obstacle, that's wonderful. So let's take as an example a student who broke a bone playing a sport. That happens all the time. Every day on high school campuses across the country, students break their bones playing soccer or basketball or baseball or whatever. That has at minimum two effects. One is the physical pain and discomfort, right? All of a sudden you're in a cast and you can't write anymore, or you can't walk like you normally do. So that sort of upheaval from a physical standpoint would require somebody to adjust their lifestyle. There's also the mental anguish that a student might be going through because of loss of an activity that means a lot to them. So that's one event that's caused, again, at minimum, 2 different types of obstacles that a teacher can write about. So they can say, hey, Mark broke his right arm a week before our final exam, and he worked so hard in communicating to me his his uneasiness and his concern about it. We set aside time for him to take the exam through an accommodation, and I'm pleased to report that as a result, he got an A on it or whatever, and he showed perseverance through this process, and so on and so forth. So that's a specific example. If you've got something like that, if you've had a student who's had that sort of experience and you can speak to that, that shows a sort of resilience that everybody's going to need in college. It doesn't matter who you are, what you plan to study, whether you have privileges or not, you are going to experience obstacles of some kind or another when you're in college, and having a demonstration of resilience coming into college is helpful. So that's why I really encourage teachers to draw upon that if they've observed it.
Friends, this concludes this part of my interview on Teacher Rex with Heath Einstein. Hope you join us next week for the next part. On Thursday's episode, Andy Strickler's back, and he's going to continue to share what is it that deans of admission at small colleges talk about when they get together? What's keeping them up at night? What are the concerns? We'll have part 2 of 2 of that conversation. We'll also have part 2 of 2 of our interview with Sam from right here in Atlanta, Samantha from New Jersey, talking about the stress and pressures that they feel going through the college admission process. Sammy's a freshman in college, and Sam is a senior in high school. And then Lisa will be back with the spotlight, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. You got to tune in on Thursday to find out what that is. And friends, in closing, I really was on cloud 9 this week because I read one of the best books I've read in a really long time. And the book is called You Got In Now What? Subtitle 100 Insights into Finding Your Best Life in College. And the book is written by Jay Hamilton, who's a Stanford professor. And I interviewed Jay. I interviewed him this week. And so you're going to be hearing that interview coming up in the next few weeks. You're going to sense my exuberation for this book in that interview. But at the end of the interview, I said, hey, Jay, you've written this brilliant book. You read 300 books to prep for it, by the way, looking at what makes a difference in people's college experience. I said, would it be okay if I read some of these short chapters to our audience? I mean, they're only 300 words. And Jay literally, he told me, he said, if I wrote a chapter and it was 302 words, I made myself get it down to 300. I said, I'm not doing any type of copyright infringement, am I? He's like, no, I'd be honored. So I'm going to close you out with chapter 35. And this is in a subsection of his book, because he has the whole book broken down into 7 different subsections. And so this is written in a subsection called Thinking. So all of these chapters are kind of under the Thinking chapter. And all the subsections have to do with what makes a liberal arts education special. So this chapter is called, What Would You Do If You Could Not Fail? All right, here we go. That's the question that got Cory Booker unstuck. In college, he had clear goals: play varsity, get A's, be deeply involved in public service. But in his first year in law school, he could not define what was next. His mother set him straight. She asked, if you knew for sure you would be successful, what would you do? Who would you be? How would you behave? How would you feel? How would you serve? Answer that question. Feel that. Act like that. She noted that if he did fail, he would be wiser, stronger, and more capable. That reframing re-energized Booker. It led to a new question. If I were to do good for others, what would I need in order to excel? Whom would I need to meet? The answers led him to life in politics. Fear of failure can keep you focused on the credential ladder without asking whether you're headed where you want to go. As a young alum working on Capitol Hill put it, when people start looking for internships, the tech companies, investment banks, and consulting firms are appealing because they have a structured application process, interview timeline, path to a full-time job offer. He noted that other career paths have less certainty, especially at the start. Public service work, nonprofit work, startups, any organization that doesn't have a big HR department won't have this structure. Graduating with a degree in economics, he turned down a highly paid job to pursue work in Congress. His first job, assembling binders for hearings. 18 months later, he helped draft legislation. Choosing a less structured path, betting on yourself, but the gains in experience and satisfaction can be tremendous. So, friends, I close you with that question for you to ask yourself. What would you do if you could not fail? See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our international admissions expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.